Good morning, Houston. Welcome to a tip from Gilbert. No, I'm not Gilbert Garcia. My name is Julian Ramirez. I'm a member of the Houston City Council. Subbing for Gilbert. We haven't kidnapped him. He's okay. He's just traveling and unable to be with us this morning. But he's asked me to guest host for him, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you and to take this time to hopefully educate and inform Houstonians about an issue that a lot of people care about. I am so fortunate this morning to have with me the president and CEO of the Houston Harris County Coalition for the Homeless, Kelly Young.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to see you.
You bet, Kelly. And you're doing me a huge favor because I knew I was guest hosting last week. We had a guest lined up. They canceled Friday afternoon, and I was scrambling for people. And of course, I thought about you because homelessness has been in the news lately. Mm-hmm. And is something that so many of us care about. And thank you for last minute being willing to come on the show and help us out.
Of course. Glad to be here.
So I want to get started, Kelly, by having you explain, if you will, to our viewers and listeners across Houston, what does the Coalition for the Homeless do?
I think it's helpful because I don't think very many people understand that we actually run a homeless response system. So we are the designated organization from Housing and Urban Development, federal funding, to provide an oversight of all of the homeless services in our region, in our area. So we think of ourselves as sort of the air traffic controllers, right? At an airport, we're kind of making sure everybody is aligned on time, doing what they're supposed to be doing, following all the rules, keeping it safe, keeping it moving. But we're also a little bit like the airport itself. So we also make sure that all the right services are aligned and available so that people trying to move through an airport can get what they need. We're the same thing for individuals experiencing homelessness.
That's great. If you know anything about airports and air traffic controllers, and I don't, but everybody knows, I think, that as airplanes come in, the air traffic controller tells them where to go, what runway to go to. And as they take off, the air traffic controller tells them when they're able to take off and from what runway. And so when we think about the Coalition for the Homeless, it's a coalition. How many organizations do you sort of direct and get people to?
So directly 77 different organizations that provide homelessness services, but over 100 organizations that work with us collaboratively because they may have a part of the homeless response system that they do. They may not house somebody, but they may do daytime services or something else. So the idea behind it was instead of having all these one-offs, we used to call them the pickup sticks. So, you threw those pickup sticks on the ground and there's all these different ones. It was to coordinate all of those services and make those connecting relationships so that we could direct people more quickly through the homeless response system and not have the individual have to go to 6, 7, 8 different organizations, but create a direct path for them.
That's great. And when we think of ways in which a person who is experiencing homelessness can get served by the coalition, I guess there are a number of ways that someone can sort of get referred to the coalition or one of its partner agencies. Is that right?
Yes. So a big part of what we do in terms of coordinating access is having hubs or places that people could go if they're experiencing homelessness. That's typically the Beacon, Search, places that will do a housing assessment. But we also have outreach because we know that people aren't going to be able to come all the time into a direct location. They may not have transportation. They may be living further out. And so the outreach teams go out and do those assessments. Because we're limited in funding and our federal funding, we made the decision that we would use those dollars to house people who've been on the street the longest and most vulnerable. So people with a documented disability, they have to go through an assessment to see if they're even eligible for the type of housing we offer through the response system. If not, then we direct them to other organizations, and those might be United Way organizations or faith-based organizations. But that way we go to the person, we don't make the person come to us.
Got it. And so you mentioned a lot of organizations do outreach. Sometimes the police department may encounter some folks who are homeless, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're getting arrested because the police can sometimes be the first step to getting someone to a service provider to help them with their situation. Is that right?
Correct. So we have a lot of partners that are not just social service agencies. So law enforcement, the Harris Center, which is a mental health component, HRC, which is a recovery center component. So the idea is that anybody who's coming across somebody experiencing homelessness, their first ask is, how can we help? Not how do we get rid of you? And I think that that's important. People sometimes misunderstand what law enforcement does and how they're a huge partner for us in lots of ways of both creating an opportunity for us to meet with people, but also on their own, when somebody calls, they're able to, they may call the police because they see somebody in their neighborhood. Then you have a much better response by somebody from law enforcement because they're trained to actually address homelessness.
That's great. And when we talk about Houston's homeless response, I know we have made a lot of progress in the last several years. I can tell you, when I ran for office back in 2023, I complained a lot about some of the issues that Houston faces. And we're working on those. But one thing I did not complain about, because I knew we were doing a pretty good job, was our homeless response. And things have happened that have made it more challenging to provide services for the homeless and to get them into housing. Can you speak a little bit to what happened in 2024 that really complicated our efforts?
So I think about our homeless response system almost like a house, right? And so we have the bottom floor of our house, which is federal funding. Most of our funding comes from the federal government. And those dollars are already used every single year to house people that we currently are housing, people with documented disability who've been on the street a long time, about 6,200 people. Then you had two opportunities to actually make huge gains, and that was Harvey and COVID. And so those influx of federal dollars, again, on top of our regular dollars, actually showed us that if we were able to have a little bit more money in, we could actually start to serve people along the entire continuum. Well, in 2024, we ended those COVID dollars. And so we're on the pursuit of adding that second floor to our house, which is to help people upstream who may not fit under the federal dollars, but help them maybe not fall into homelessness or get out of homelessness quicker.
So federal funding has sort of dried up.
Yes.
In many respects. And I know that one of the ways we helped get the homeless into permanent housing with services was through the HUD vouchers, which I recall last spring, I believe it was, dried up.
Yes.
And we had no more vouchers that we could use to take the homeless from the navigation center and put them into permanent housing with support services.
Correct. And there were two types. One were just regular vouchers, which also just stopped completely. So anybody waiting for a voucher on the public housing side also didn't get vouchers. But we had emergency housing vouchers that then were changed to be a shorter period of time. So we're having to move people more quickly through. But without vouchers, that's one element of adding to your housing interventions so that you can get more people into housing, and then you pay for the services on top so that they have a case manager who's working their physical or psychological or whatever supports they need to help them move on or else stabilize in permanent supportive housing.
Got it. And Mayor Whitmire has announced several months ago his homelessness plan to try to react to the increasing numbers of homeless we've seen on our streets, because the numbers have jumped in the last year or so. I think everybody sees that. Why do you think that is, that our numbers of our homeless have started to increase a little bit?
Well, I think two things. In general, our numbers look about the same, but I think what we're seeing is more visible homelessness. I think we're seeing people who have much more complicated situations where we've been able to house people more quickly and then they move in and we're not really seeing them on the street. What you see a lot of times still on the street are some of our hardest to place. So those may be individuals who are not interested in even talking to me. Like if I come up and I'm engaging in outreach, they'll just walk away, because we've never addressed two different systems nationally, but just in general here, which is building a much more robust mental health services and more robust substance use services. We tend to make the homeless response system responsible for those other systems because we don't fund those other systems efficiently or effectively enough that they're able to manage the individuals who might have severe mental health or severe drug addiction. And so you're seeing very visible people and those that in a lot of cases won't even engage with outreach workers or homeless response system.
Well, that's a great point. And a big component of this is the mental illness part of it. And we will talk about that. But one thing I did want to ask you is Houston has had what we've called a housing first model, which is different from the way other cities might do it. And in fact, we've gotten a lot of great attention. Folks from other cities who work on homelessness have come to Houston time after time to look at what we do and ask, how are you guys doing it? And you've I'm sure, talked to folks and explained exactly how we do it many times before.
Yes. And so two things I always like to point out to people. One is actually our collaborative nature and our coordination. Although this was mandated by HUD many, many years ago, we are a city that exemplifies how to actually coordinate services and collaboration. We are also really, really efficient with our partners. So we use all of our beds and availability, and we expend 94% of our federal dollars. So first, what I educate them on is how and why we do it the way we do it. I talk about Housing First from a different lens. I ran Housing First programs. I've run housing programs in general. To me, it's just a logical argument. You can't send somebody into substance use treatment without an exit plan for them when they get out. You also can't have somebody sit on the street and wait 45 days to enter a treatment program without some place for them to go. So I understand sort of the emotional response to like, well, you're just going to put them in an apartment and leave them. Is like, absolutely not. That would not be a logical thing to do. You place somebody somewhere to live so they can actually start working on the things that they need to work on. Then you assign them a case manager. The case manager helps them work that part. But again, I go back to the substance and treatment beds. I also run a treatment program as well. And the waiting time to get into treatment means that you often lose people. And if they're on the street and you're just trying to leave them there and find them over and over again, you probably will not be able to get them in treatment. If I place them in an apartment with a case manager who's following them and saying, it's about time we get you started in that treatment program, I might have a much better opportunity to actually get them in than if I just leave them on the street and expect to find them one other day and there's magically a bed available for them, which has never been there before.
Well, that's a great point. It's not enough to provide 4 walls and a roof for a lot of folks who experience homelessness, because there needs to be services to go along with that.
Right.
All right,
so I ran an apartment complex. Here's an example of a model that I think sometimes doesn't get talked about. The case managers lived right there on the property, or stayed right there on the property. So they were there, work shift hours, and the apartments are right there. So when somebody moved in, there was somebody available to them. And so I think sometimes it gets used because it feels like I see that person. There's no way that person can be in an apartment by themselves. Right. But that's not where that person would go. That's not how that works. But I think the shorthand of Housing First and some of the rhetoric that gets tied to it does not demonstrate the logic of it, and more of, well, that doesn't really fit my understanding of what should happen to somebody. Somebody should get better first before they get to live somewhere. And our point is you can't get better until you have a place to live.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty key, housing, right? We have a caller, and so we're going to go to that caller. I believe Joaquin is holding for us. Joaquin, what's your question?
Hello. I was wondering, since I am a college student, I was wondering what the youth could do to contribute to the homeless crisis in Houston.
Oh, I really appreciate that question. I find that a lot of people are very interested in what they can do. A couple of things I always suggest is, if you have free time, which you don't because you're a student, but maybe, is first check in your own college or your own school. Sometimes you have students there that are actually experiencing homelessness, and you have resources available. So there's already volunteer opportunities available at your university or your college. And that could be very, very helpful. If you're looking for an opportunity to learn more about it, even if you're a business major or something else, take a social work class just to get the understanding of sort of the root causes of why homelessness happens. Certainly in the community, if you're running into individuals who are experiencing homelessness, I would go to our website. We have a one-pager that tells you what and how to direct people. But engaging with individuals who are on the street, you need to be really careful. They have no understanding that you're a safe person. And so they may react to you in a way that I would if somebody just approached me on the street. So make sure that, you know, it's not you not doing it on your own. I strongly suggest that people look up different social service agencies and do your research, decide whether it's a way, the way that they approach the work is something that you can support and involve yourself there. Even as a college student, I worked my way through college, so I also know this part. Small amounts of donations, water, $10 a month, really makes a difference to anybody who's actually providing that. But those are all sort of different ways to do it. I think I always like for people to really spend time understanding it. It's not enough just to have knowledge about homelessness. You really have to understand the complexity of the issue. So I hope one of those things sparks your interest and gives you an opportunity to support the work.
Yes, ma'am, for sure. It was very insightful. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for calling, Joaquin. And so we were talking about the Housing First model that has been successful here in Houston. That has involved what we call a navigation center. Can you explain to the listeners and the folks who are watching what a navigation center is?
Sure. And I did want to point out some of the reason that we are successful with Housing First is because we do have a commercial apartment connection. So we've been very lucky to have local landlords work with us around housing individuals. Other cities have struggled because they actually don't have any housing. I mean, you know, they're 7 years behind having enough actual affordable housing for people to move in. So I always want to make that difference because we are a little bit at an advantage. But I also think the second piece around the navigation center. So what we used our COVID dollars for was to ensure that we had enough available housing first. And then we went and closed encampments. And the encampment model was that you first, so if I went to an encampment, we have currently a couple of very large ones that are growing. What we would have done under the COVID model would have gone and said, okay, there's 50 people here. I have 50 housing interventions for them. And we would have gone through our whole process, and most of those individuals would have gone straight to their apartment, met with their case manager the next day. Some can't go because they don't have IDs. The apartment wasn't ready because it was a voucher, and you have to have clearance of that, of the inspection of those apartments. So they would go and wait in the navigation center until those things were cleared and then move straight to the apartment. And the idea behind that is you don't leave them in the encampment, because the second piece of the encampment closure is that once we've housed everybody, the maintenance of that area was to be done by law enforcement. So it's cleared, it's fenced off, and then it's the trespass signs and the no camping bans are used to say you cannot come back to this area. And we were able to house, you know, hundreds of people over COVID through our encampment strategy. And that's what the Navigation Center did. What we would like to see, and what we really proposed to the mayor in some of the conversations when he first started, is what would be a navigation or a hub model, where it's a location that's a great front door for people to walk in, and whatever your issue is regarding homelessness can be resolved. You don't have to be just waiting for an apartment. You could be somebody who, you know, works 3 days out of the week, but doesn't make enough money to live in a boarding house 4 weeks out of the month. So 1 week they are on the street. And so that person would not be eligible for our housing under the model we have and the funding we have. But under a hub model, they would be diverted into some kind of way, like, well, let's see if we can get you additional shifts at your job, or let's try to figure out a way to pay your boarding home for 1 more week a month just to get you back on your feet, so you're not having to access services through the street. So the hub really works as almost like the information referral system center. So I come in, whatever my problem is, it's addressed. If I need a place to sleep overnight, I'm taken to somewhere that has an overnight bed and met with a case manager in the morning. If it's just a diversion manner, then I might work with an organization that has some diversion dollars. So a really strong system requires having those access points, those front doors, but also a holding place in case people need to wait before they can go somewhere else. And you don't want the navigation beds to get stalled out, because then you can't move any more people off the street because you can't move them on.
And that has been a problem, as I understand it, is the navigation center we have has gotten full because we don't have those vouchers to permanently house someone with services. And that has been that's been a problem.
Correct.
And so Dominic is watching. Thank you for pointing out that drug addiction
Mhm.
is an issue that many of our homeless face.
Mhm.
And I'm sure one of the services that we've been talking about would go to helping alleviate or deal with that particular issue. Can you speak to that?
Yes. So I actually ran an outpatient substance use treatment program for people coming out of prison or diversion. Something happened on the street and they're diverted. Two things I just want to mention. It doesn't really matter whether substance use resulted in homelessness or your homelessness resulted in substance use. The issue is getting treatment one way or the other. And I think they sometimes get conflated and we have feelings about one and less feelings about the other. One of the issues in the state of Texas is we do not spend enough money in substance use treatment. So you could wait 30 days for a residential bed, which means that somebody on the street is going to be languishing, and you might have one moment when somebody's ready for residential treatment, but you can't get them in the door. And so one of the things I always talk about is the super highway to getting people out of homelessness. The response system, which is coordinating and ensuring those services are available, is one lane. Substance use is another lane, and it needs to be fully funded by the state at a level that's robust enough to actually serve that person. The other thing is for us to have a much better understanding, not just knowledge, but understanding of what substance use really is for people and how long it takes for people to really get stabilized with that. So if I see an individual who's experiencing pretty extreme substance use, that's going to be a trial and error multiple times before they stabilize. And as much as I'd like that to be available for them immediately, it's not. And so we have a bigger systems problem to address it. But for now, what we do is as quickly as we possibly can, work them into either outpatient or residential, depending on their actual use, and move them along as best we can. But that's not a very robust system in the state of Texas.
Yes. And I was looking at your website last night again, and one of the things I saw on there is that at the Coalition for the Homeless, you guys are very concerned about addressing the root causes of homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And as you pointed out, sometimes drug addiction is a cause of homelessness. We've talked about mental illness as well. So what are some of the things that the Coalition for the Homeless does to help address these root causes?
So a couple of things. One is, first and foremost, the root of homelessness typically is economic downturn for a family or else family conflict. That has been pretty consistent in our data over time. And one of the things I always think about, and I remind everybody, is that if you go to United Way, they talk about the fact that over 40% of people in Houston, Harris County meet the ALICE standard, which basically means that you're $400 away from a major economic catastrophe. The second is that different places in the city, but in general, there has been an uptick in rents. So you might have a job and be working and doing fine, but your rent now has gone up by 20%, or your childcare has, or you got cut a shift at work or whatever. That economic instability and the fact that we have such a close line to poverty for so many of our individuals means that we have to address that first. So one of the things we do have in the homeless response system, as it's required by HUD, is economic and education growth model. So we expect you to get employed or to get on benefits or to do something, because you really have to be able to be self-sufficient at some point in time if you can be. So we really encourage that. We work very closely with United Way organizations that have strong employment, back to work kind of programs. So that's important too. On the substance use side, I mean, obviously we're going to work very closely. In fact, in August, we're having a presentation on substance use and understanding the actual system and how that works in Houston. So the mental health piece, we've had a much stronger relationship now with the Harris Center in the last year and a half since I started, because we as a society made a major shift in what happened for severely mentally ill individuals many years ago, and then never actually funded the intervention at its full amount. And so we have consistently created more and more severely mentally ill people ending up in homelessness. So we absolutely have to have those as a partner, and looked at that as well in terms of some legislative changes that came up this last time to make that easier to help that person that you know and you see on the street who clearly is not attending to this world, but they're not a danger to themselves or others. So part of my job is to make sure we're building strong systems with those other systems. Another area where people tend to fall into homelessness is after a major illness or coming out of the hospital. They may have been there long enough that they lost their job or they lost their place where they lived, and they are then sent out of the medical system and sometimes directly right onto the street because shelters can't take them if they can't self-care. And so stronger, more robust system around respite care. How do we get people 30, 60 days after a hospital stay? So not only am I building my own system and making sure that we're meeting those components, I'm trying to work with all these other systems to say, how are you going to stop feeding these pathways into homelessness? Economic downturn, higher prices on apartments, health concerns, mental health concerns, like all of these things have to align and be going the same direction.
Well, you just pointed out that there's so many layers to this issue. You talked about economic downturns and the fact that so many Houstonians are not that far away from being in a situation where they might be homeless, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the services, as you pointed out, is trying to help them. Working with a case manager. And if you need education, if you need job training, your case manager can help you with that.
Correct.
And get you pointed in the right direction.
Correct.
We have so many people, so many organizations that want to help, that are
Yes.
just waiting there for folks who are experiencing homelessness so that they can help them.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think our partnerships demonstrate that. So not just United Way organizations, but faith-based organizations, small community organizations. I'm working with a small group in Highlands, Texas, which is outside Baytown. These are small, homegrown organizations, faith-based organizations that are trying to create a coordinated plan to address homelessness in their area because they feel like they're all doing something, but it's not really changing what's happening. And so we actually have a meeting tomorrow to map out. So one of the things we do is we asset map. We look how many people are actually homeless versus might be precariously housed, might be just down during the day versus what type of organizations are available to them. And so once you map that all out, then you can actually coordinate so that all of those organizations that want to help are available and understand what is the mechanism to get them in.
Great. And we have another caller now.
Okay.
We'll go to Mark. What's your question?
Hey, good morning, Gilbert. How you doing? You doing all right this morning?
I'm actually not Gilbert. I'm Julian, but I hope Gilbert's all right. I'm certainly doing great.
That's okay. Y'all sound just alike. I just know what you're saying.
What can we answer for you, Mark? Okay, somehow we got disconnected. Mark, give it another shot. Call back and we'll try to get your question answered. So many layers to this. I want to talk about the mental illness part of it because that is a huge part. And you mentioned that our numbers are not that bad off when you consider where they've been. And part of that is because the homeless that we tend to see now, more likely to be those folks with mental illness. And those are the hardest to help. Right?
Correct.
And the legislature just recently helped us out on this. Thank goodness, because one of the things that we were wanting to do, another tool we were hoping to work with, is a way to make it easier to help those folks who are severely mentally ill and cannot make decisions for themselves. We have folks on the streets who are not able to make an intelligent, informed decision about whether to accept services or not. And can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so, I've been in this work for a long time. I've been in social services for over 30 years. So I know people's resistance to the idea of compelling people into care. But when you see an individual who's been on the street for many, many years and had multiple contacts with, hot teams or with mental health outreach workers or homeless outreach workers, but there's no way to get them through the door and possibly into mental health services because they're not a danger to themselves and they're not a danger to someone else, then there's very little that anybody can do. And it's what makes people really frustrated in the community because first of all, from a humanitarian standpoint, this person needs help. Like, I don't know why we can't help them. And then I start to get frustrated because I see this person and they act out and they do things that are inappropriate in my neighborhood, or makes it feel less safe, or I worry about what's happening in my neighborhoods. So what was looked at, and other states have done this, and we did this in conjunction with the Harris Center, who's our local mental health authority, was to look to expand that ability to compel to include if somebody's not able to recognize that it's actually a psychological or psychiatric term, and I will never be able to say it, so I will not say it out loud because I always say it wrong.
I know the word you're talking about.
Yes, you know that. I can't see it either. Is to allow for one more opportunity. So I want to be clear with people. This is for someone that we in the response system has known for a long time, the mental health services and law enforcement. So this is not, I don't like Joe, so I'm going to go call the police and have them compel them into an institution. That is not going to happen.
And we'll talk about a concrete example of how this makes such a difference. But we're going to go back to Mark,
Oh,
who's
good.
called back in.
He made it.
Yeah, sorry, but I don't know
No
what
worries.
happened. It just when something happened, I was trying to talk and y'all must didn't hear me. But anyway, I want to ask this question though. I know y'all evaluate these young men that go out and commit crimes and whatever, and you do a mental evaluation on these young men. And when it comes out, y'all want to stabilize them and get them ready for trial. But I'm asking this question: do y'all ever come with any decision to say at the time of the crime that they took place, they were not in their right state of mind, they had a mental problem? Does that affect them at any given time, instead of just stabilizing them and just putting them on the medication just to get them to go before a 12 jury? Because he's already did what he did. We know he did it, but you see what I'm saying? But you still put a person
Exactly.
on trial.
Yeah, and let me tell you, Mark, that really is a question and a topic, an important one, and one that we should talk about for probably another day, because
Okay.
you're getting at how does the criminal justice system treat the mentally ill, and that is a whole nother topic that we can get into,
Okay.
but
Okay.
but not necessarily dealing with homelessness, although many of our homeless do have the misfortune of ending up in the criminal justice system.
Yes, they do.
But-
yes, a
but-
lot of homeless.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
But thank you for
Okay, thank
for
you.
calling in, Mark. And
I do think one thing to mention is that what is also unique about Houston is the diversion center, and is run by the Harris Center, which is our local mental health authority. And I just wanted to mention there is a diverting mechanism for somebody. So like a trespassing, issue or a substance issue, instead of going to jail, we do divert. The trick there is that in a diversion, because you can't compel somebody into care, they're amazing and the Harris Center does an amazing job, but that does not mean they have to stay. And so there's some additional work to do there, but as much as possible in Harris County and the city of Houston, we're not trying to put people for low-level crimes that have to deal with homelessness or nuisance behaviors in jail, because we know that that's, first of all, our jails don't have a lot of room, and second of all, it's not an appropriate intervention.
Great point. And Kelly, let's talk about that for a little bit, because my background is before I got elected to city council, I was a prosecutor for more than 30 years. And so I can tell you what we were doing in the early 90s to handle homelessness, and it was not good.
Mhm.
Frankly, it was not the right approach. And there were many instances where the way that an officer dealt with homelessness is he got arrested for trespassing
Mhm.
and he went straight to jail, right? And so you saw just folks being recycled over and over and over through the criminal justice system, and it did those folks in that condition no good at all.
Mm-mm.
Now we have a better approach. We have evolved. And you mentioned the Harris Center, and that's one way in which we have evolved. I had the opportunity to tour the Harris Center last year, and I was just so impressed.
Mhm.
And the way it works is, correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, let's say an officer encounters someone who is homeless, who is trespassing, right? Technically, he's violating the law. The officer does not have to take that person to jail. The officer can ask that person, I can take you to jail, but would you rather go to the Harris Center?
Mhm.
Would you rather be diverted in essence, out of the criminal justice system so that you don't even enter the criminal justice system. I'll take you to the Harris Center where you can get some services and you can stay there for a period of time. Have I stated that accurately?
Yes. And so what it does, particularly for somebody with mental health, gives them the opportunity, and substance use, because they're a behavioral health center, is an opportunity to get stabilized, maybe back on medication, correct case management, and hopefully a step down model back into some stability in housing. That's always the last piece that's a little bit more complicated. The Harris Center does an excellent job partnering with us, but as long as we don't have vouchers or different systems, we tend to run out of beds. But what they do is they realize that for law enforcement, most officers want to do what's right, but they also need something that's easy. I don't want to spend all night down with a trespassing when this person doesn't need to be in jail for it. So giving them a front door to take people to, they drop them off, and then at that moment, the paperwork is taken over and the intake is done by mental health professionals.
Great. In the Harris Center, this model is great on so many levels. Not only does the person have the opportunity to get help, to get stabilized, right? It keeps them out of the criminal justice system. Many of you know that our jails are overcrowded here in Harris County, badly so. We have to transport some of our prisoners to other jails out of state. Can you believe that? Harris County has some prisoners in Mississippi.
Yep.
Because we don't have the space in our jails. And so certainly we don't want to take up more beds in our county jail with folks who are merely experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, we're actually also doing it in the same level of the mental health beds in hospitals. Mental health, like our main larger mental health hospitals, are often holding people that are awaiting trial for things for competency for trial, for very small misdemeanor things that are not necessary either, because if you could compel them into outpatient care or some other model in mental health, it would be a better, quicker system, and you would free up the beds for people who really need to be in a much longer residential care model.
Right. And, one of your partners on the homelessness effort, Mike Nichols, who's our director of the city Housing and Community Development Department, was your predecessor as president and CEO of the Coalition for the Homeless. But Mike likes to point out that it is less expensive for us as a society to put someone in permanent housing with support services than to put them in a jail cell and house them in the county jail.
Correct. And the other piece of it is that you have a much better chance of that person in a permanent supportive housing situation, first of all, moving on. I mean, when they stabilize, we say permanent supportive housing because we want them to understand it's not going to be pulled away from them. But that doesn't mean they have to stay there. They get a job, they go back to school, something happens, their life moves on. They move out of that, it opens up a bed for someone else. But I think the other piece is that if you come out of jail, you have now you now have a record. And as much as we like to think that we're a good second chance employer and hire, we're not as very generous with people who now have a criminal record. If you have an eviction, that does not leave your record. And so we've created ways where when we punish, and rightfully so, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be evicted or for some things go to jail, but because we also don't do a good job on the other side of reintegrating people and really giving clear second chances, then you've now created a whole group of people who are going to end up being homeless because there's no way for them to get housing or employment. So
yes, and you bring up an important point. What are the unintended consequences of the public policy that we enact, and how does it affect folks who are homeless, or folks who are very near to being homeless? And so we certainly need to consider that as well. I want to go back to this issue of mental illness, right? And you mentioned that we made a legislative change. Appreciate the legislature doing this, but what it does is it makes it easier for officers to intervene when someone is at risk of suffering serious injury or even death. And I think back to last winter, we had a couple of hard freezes. It's never safe to sleep out on the streets of Houston at night, especially downtown, right? But even so, during a hard freeze, you have the added risk that you could die from exposure.
Yes.
And that has happened, and it did happen. And when it happened last winter, people asked, well, was this person offered any services? And I remember one specific case. It turned out, yes, they were offered services. It's just that that individual was so mentally ill, they were not able to intelligently make the decision to accept services, make the decision to spend the night in a warm place.
Right.
And so instead, they slept on a bench or whatever, and the next morning they were found to have died from exposure. Right.
Yes.
So that's one of the situations this legislation was meant to address.
Correct. Correct. And part of it is, so when we do an encampment closure, we go out to do outreach. There are individuals who will not engage with outreach workers. I mean, we offer them water, we offer them food, but people have free will. So if they're not interested in talking to me, they don't have to talk to me. But if they also just don't see me as somebody who's going to support their current viewpoint of the world, meaning I'm fine and I'm good, but we're all like, no, you literally have an open wound and should be going to the hospital. We didn't have a mechanism for that. So one of the ways that we're looking at this is the Harris Center, law enforcement, and then some data from us, but we're really the least player in this, is to say we've had, 50 contacts with this person. They have an open wound. We've tried to engage in mental health. They've been in and out of NPC, which is our psychiatric center, multiple times. We need to compel this person into the next step. They're still going to have all of their civil rights still met on the other side. They cannot be, detained unless they meet those requirements on the other side. But it allows for us to say, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, who was in the bus, I'm going to take you in because what you're deciding on, and I see a whole track record of behavior that tells me that you are unable to make good judgments for yourself. I'm going to have to overrule your free will, at least this first step, to see whether we could help you or not.
And it needs to be pointed out that there is due process, right?
Absolutely.
So if someone is put into, a hospital setting against their will, if you will, that's for a limited time.
Right.
They can't be held there for an extended period of time. And it's something that has to be reviewed by a magistrate.
Yeah.
They're in short order.
I think it very nicely reminds us that due process is key to our sense of freedom in the United States, that you have to have that ability.
Of course. And, you talk about root causes. Mental illness is clearly one. Do you think that the state of Texas does enough to provide care for the severely mentally ill that we see on our streets?
I think the intent is there. This is one of those things where, again, this is a money issue. So a perfect example is there was a great piece of legislation that was up this last session that a lot of the homeless response systems across the state of Texas worked with to create mental health crisis centers where people could take people who are in a mental health crisis situation, regardless if they're homeless or not, and quickly move them through the psychiatric system and get them the care they needed. It was well crafted. We spent a lot of time on it, but there was no money appropriated to it. And if there's no money appropriated to it, it's not really going to go anywhere. So these are, again, some of these choices that we have to make, I think, where we align our intention with our action. And if our intention is to have a really strong mental health system across the state of Texas, some of that action requires that we pay for that and make sure that that's well funded so that we can operate in the ways that we need to support the people who really, really need the service.
Yeah. And Kelly, you're being nice. I'll say it out loud. The state of Texas needs at least another hospital for the mentally ill.
Yeah.
And part of the reason we see folks out on the streets who are mentally ill is because we don't have enough beds.
We unfortunately, it's always interesting when you look at these things. So institutionalizing people way back when, and everybody remembers and can see the pictures and why we stopped institutionalizing people. Very good reason for a lot of that. Of course, you also could have fixed the institutions. You didn't have to change the model, but they did change the model. And the idea behind it, which I agree with, is that community health centers were supposed to be able to back this up and support individuals who were living on the street so they could live in an apartment where they had they had psychiatric care in their apartment setting. So a hospital homes model is what Wayne Young would call it. But systematically, after removing the institutional option or the residential option for people, they consistently defunded or underfunded or never funded the community health models to support those individuals. So we actually created our own problem by trying to solve something, but not willing to apply the funding necessary to ensure that those systems were in place.
And you mentioned Wayne Young. Wayne Young, for our listeners, runs the Harris Center.
Yeah, amazing human being.
Yeah, we have a number of amazing human beings working on the homelessness issue. You are one, Kelly. You've been in this space for decades. I know you've been at the Coalition for the Homeless for a few years. But prior to that, as you pointed out earlier, you've worked with folks who are suffering from drug addiction.
I ran a career and recovery resources, substance use and employment services. And actually during COVID, the current CEO, Nikki Agueno, and I created a social enterprise model to have individuals who are living in encampments or just out of homelessness be able to work in landscaping. And so we were able to actually take people, they'd work 4 hours, and the county took the program on. I actually worked with Adrian Garcia on this. It's called E2E, where they actually were doing things for the county, cleaning parks, doing different things. These are individuals who are living under a bridge, get up at 7 a.m, come all the way down to career and recovery, go out, work 4 or 5 hours in the heat, get lunch and breakfast, and then are sent back because they don't have a place to live yet, while their case manager is working on getting them a place to live. So when people tell me that they're not willing to work, it's just not true. I don't know anybody in my circle of friends would get up at 7 a.m, and go work for 4 hours, backbreaking work, and leave and be able to just go sleep under a bridge. Like, I don't know anybody who could do that. So in creating that was to try to create an employment model that fit the nature of how somebody needed to work, living in those particular conditions. And I mean, at the end of the day, we all want money. I mean, I don't know about you, but I like my check. And so creating that, yeah, right, that dignity for them to go pick and choose what they wanted to eat and not just have whatever somebody handed out to them, really does change somebody's view of how the world can be better for themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to talk in the last few minutes that we have about what the city is doing. And recently, we passed an adjustment to the civility ordinance, right? And so this has been in the news. For your listeners who haven't heard of this before, the civility ordinance is an ordinance that prohibits, in Houston anyway, the way this one is written, it prohibits sitting or lying down on a sidewalk. We've had one on the books for a while. It's not citywide, but it is in certain designated areas of the city. And we have, I don't know, maybe about 15 different areas where this is the law, if you will, during daytime hours. So what we voted on last week was to make this the law, if you will, in 2 parts of the city, the Central Business District and the East End Management District or Business District. I think I've got that right. So just 2 areas of the city. It now applies during the hours of 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And it prohibits, as I say, sitting or lying down on sidewalks. And so there's been a lot of talk, misinformation in some quarters about folks saying this criminalizes homelessness. I disagree with that. It does not criminalize homelessness. It addresses only the spaces that are sidewalks only in 2 parts of the city. And this is a complicated issue with a lot of folks have mixed feelings about it. And I want to give you a chance to share your feelings on the civility ordinance.
Sure. A couple things. One is I'm going to pull us way back because I think one of the most interesting things that the city's actually working on is this idea of equilibrium. And so that you may have these tools and use them, because we have a statewide camping ban. So we have some of these tools already in play. What you want to do is eliminate the opportunity to have to use these tools, right? So council members have constituents, they have people they have to answer to, businesses, same thing. So if we pull it all the way back and we look at what we would actually like to see in the response system is we would like to build enough of a system out so that if somebody's falling into homelessness or experiencing homelessness, we have enough housing intervention or correct interventions for them that within 90 days, they are stabilized. So if I stay focused on that, which is really my job, right, and to create a response system that is robust enough to address that, then the civility ordinances don't have to be at play, right? So I take it as a challenge that I have to do my work better and my partners have to show up in different ways, because what I want to do is remove any of the necessities of people to have to limit where people are because I have a place for them to go. The second piece is that part of this is ensuring that there's a place for somebody to go overnight. And so we have been working on this downtown, where individuals who, first of all, we have kind of a mixed downtown, and I want to be clear about that. We have a lot of people who are down there during the day and just down the day, and they don't spend the night overnight. Those that are overnight typically have been there a long time, don't engage in outreach services, which is a different group. And then you have some that have just currently fallen into homelessness. And we found that those individuals really did want a place to go. And so that's why we use HRC. So it's an overnight bed that they can stay in, and a case manager meets with them in the morning and hopefully diverts them.
And HRC stands for Houston Recovery Center.
Yes.
Located downtown.
And they have an outreach team themselves that then can coordinate to come get someone.
It's in the same building as what we would call the sobriety center,
Mhm.
right? It was envisioned, I think, part of it was, instead of taking someone who's intoxicated publicly to the Harris County Jail and taking up a jail bed, we can take them to the sobriety center overnight, let them sober up, and then in the morning they can go on their merry way, right?
Mhm.
But
They were generous enough when I approached them to say, we'd like to try this. We need a place there's a bed available to expand on that mission so that they could help support the mayor's vision. The overall action plan for Harris County, because the federal dollars are Harris County, Montgomery County, Fort Bend, as well as City of Houston, is also then to address the unincorporated areas of the county. So, to me, it's the issue at hand is, how do I learn to do my work better and make sure I have the appropriate types of resources we need for the people we need to serve? And the best way I know that is to go out and interview and talk and see, because we always use data first. That's what's going to drive the work we do. And the more we understand why people are on the streets of downtown in particular, and what we could do better or differently to help them have a different option, then that's where I'll spend my time and energy.
I love that you mentioned data, and I love that the Coalition for the Homeless makes decisions based on data.
Mm-hmm.
One thing you do is every year you take a point in time count,
Mm-hmm.
sort of like a census
Mm-hmm.
of the homeless across the city, who is out there unsheltered and so forth. And, some people might say, well, that's really hard to do, to take a census of the homeless, because some of them are easily seen, others not so easily seen,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the point is, I think, and the significance we draw from it is, if you follow the same rules, if you do it the same way year after year after year, it's going to tell you what the trend is.
Correct.
And how you're doing.
Correct.
And definitely over the last 10, 15 years, the trend has been, those numbers have been decreasing in Houston.
Correct.
Right. So we're glad of that, and we want to keep it trending downward, certainly. Real quick, legislative advocacy is another thing that you guys do. The bill that we talked about
Mm-hmm.
was something that you guys pushed, and I thank you for that. Some of the things you guys were pushing for and pushing against reached my radar,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to advocate for that change, and also against one change that would essentially have shut down a lot of our centers, our service providers.
Correct.
It would have set up a zone, if you will, around school, or around service providers. Well, I've got this backwards. Around schools and such, schools, churches, and other places where you could not locate a center providing homeless services within, I forget what it was, 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet.
1,500. It was originally 500, and then they took it to 1,500, or any navigation center. So it was very broadly defined. When they took it to 1,500 and they took parks out, that was 22 organizations alone in Houston. These are people who own their buildings. These are people who do not have. So again, when you go back to a data perspective or a way that you address work. This was this legislation was built out of an experience happening in a city that was very specific to a type of organization and some experiences that a school had. That's not to say it wasn't true. It just means that that's probably not the best set of data or data points to really decide and determine whether this makes sense or not. And that's always my qualm. Yeah.
Right,
But the advocacy piece is hugely important because people expect me to come and make the same points. They don't expect board members and community members and leaders to come and say, you don't get to mess with our city in this way and make these decisions for us. This is a local decision that requires our ability to use the data and actually understand what's happening. And there are also, so the reverse of closing something would be to support something. So you could ensure that there was enough funding for security and enough transportation so somebody could get transported to mental health issues, if, mental health hospital, if they need that. Again, it goes to, instead of trying to remove people or remove things because that feels like you're going to control it, is to invest and to grow the things that are necessary to move these people into the right interventions.
Right. Thank you for that advocacy. One of the places that would have shut down, correct me if I'm wrong, is the Beacon.
Right.
Right. If that law had passed, the Beacon would have had to shut down.
Right.
And that would have been disastrous.
Right.
For homeless response. And that's not the only one. A number of other places would have had to shut down.
Places that actually house people have no problem, don't have the same issues, that happen to be close to a school. Because, we're a very dense city. And so even in are you going to close an entire apartment building and make them move somewhere else? And how is that are you going to pay them to move that building? How does that work when the residents nobody here has a problem. And you're just equating a problem, very specific problem, as though that aligns with everybody else's experience. And, that's not to say that there shouldn't be an overview and sort of a process of this, but we have ways of doing that. And so we should use those and bolster those, not just expect somebody to move.
Correct. I want to go back to the civility ordinance. And I know that's not your favorite thing about what we're doing here in Houston. I do want to point out, however, that just because someone may get a ticket in violation of the civility ordinance, that doesn't mean we're giving up on them, throwing away the key or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want folks to know that if someone who is homeless has to go to municipal court, that can be a pathway to services.
Mm-hmm.
At municipal court, we have what's called a homeless docket.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
3 times a month on Wednesdays, you have one of your cohorts there from the Coalition for the Homeless goes over to
Mm-hmm.
municipal court and works with the folks on that homeless docket.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think it's a good example, again, that if you're going to have one type of intervention, the other side has, whatever that consequence of that intervention is going to be, you have to have pathways out of whatever that consequence is, especially if you're addressing people experiencing homelessness, because they are the least able to actually resolve some of the things that we wish people would do. And so having an advocate there to talk about that and help people remove some of those citations and ensure that they are accessing the services they're needed, hugely important. I always think there's opportunity whenever there's an intervention aligned within any system. Okay, great, we're going to do that. Then what are all the other things that have to be in place, and what else can we grow or evolve to ensure that we really are addressing the issue as best as possible? So having homeless court more than just 3 days a week, more than one advocate,
Right.
those kinds of things become important.
And let me also say that there is something else the courts do if someone is given a fine and they can't pay it. In many instances, they can't pay the fine. And there's a procedure there that the judge can waive the fine.
Yeah.
Right? So it doesn't have to be a burden in that respect. Listen, we've come to the end of our hour. It has flown by.
It sure has.
Kelly, but thank you so much
Yeah.
for coming. And listen, thank you so much for what you're doing. I look at you and you're doing the Lord's work, quite frankly,
Thank you.
helping the least of us and the folks in the greatest need. And you're doing such a good thing for Houston. Please keep up the good work.
Thank you.
And I believe that we are now out of time. I want to thank our listeners and viewers for joining us. And thank you, Gilbert, for giving me this opportunity to pretend to be you and sit in your chair and in your your shoes. And have a great day, Houston. And we will see you again soon.
This is Gilbert Andrew Garcia of A Tip from Gilbert, talk, inspiration, and prayer. Listen to my show every Monday from 11 to 12 on KWWJ 1360 AM, KYOK 1140 AM, KCOH at 1230 KCOH.com, Sankeet Radio at 95.1 FM, 1460 AM, and Latino Sports, KEYH 850 AM. Call in at 832-570-8075 and follow me on social media. See you then.